Welcome to the History Collective, everybody! To receive the most recent news about ancient history and independent research from around the world, please subscribe now. My recent deep dive into the mysterious Sacsayhuaman site in Peru is the reason why I haven't made a video about the Giza Plateau's pyramids in a while. I was led back to Egypt by this. What I'm talking about in this video are the Khafre and Min Quarry Pyramids casing stones, which are set to the southwest of the Great Pyramid. These pyramids are often overlooked in favor of their larger sibling, but they do deserve more attention. They are particularly unusual because, in contrast to the Great Pyramid, both had granite casing stones, at least in part. The Khafre Pyramid had granite casing for its lowermost course, around the bottom up to a height of 41 inches, or just over a meter. How advice said 2 courses would double the height of the grenades around the base, but this is unconfirmed. We can see surviving examples of the granite casing on the south side of the pyramid. The rest of the structure was cased in Macatine limestone, a different quality to that used on the Great Pyramid, being harder and grayer and less spectacular in appearance. The smaller Men Quarry Pyramid was also pour-cased in granite. Diodorus Siculus stated that this pyramid had 15 courses of the harder pink stone, whilst Flinders Petrie thought there were 16. This means it covered a quarter of the height of the pyramid. The fact that the huge gash in the side that was dug by Arab explorers starts directly above the 17th course also indicates that this was where the granite ended and limestone began. Interestingly, at the base of the eastern side of the main quarry pyramid, there are also purpose-built pits lined with shaped granite blocks. Today, this pit is filled with sand. The largest of the 3 satellite pyramids, our main core array, was also cased in granite. The other 2 only have their cores exposed and were either unfinished or their casing has been stripped. Either way, it is believed by experts to all 3 satellite pyramids would have been planned with a granite casing. The granite casing on the mentioned pyramids was finally joined and would not be out of place in the Inca heartland of Cusco, not to mention the fact we still see stone protrusions on many blocks. Looking at pictures from the incredible Cedar Project archive, and the cutting and fitting of the granites is quite astonishing. A tight fit was important, but why do the outer surfaces look rough? Why do we see the protrusions? Why were some areas flattened and others left? It's possible the pyramid wasn't finished when Men Quarry died, and so maybe the next king didn't put in the effort to give the pyramid the perfect finish. The fact is the outer appearance of the granite casing does remain a mystery. So that's a brief description of what we can see in the field, but I rarely see an explanation for why these pyramids are granite casing in the first place. A finished pyramid would look better if it was cased in one type of stone, and not 2. And so this has led me to believe that the granite was a purely functional addition. Transporting, cutting, and fitting one piece of granite to a Giza pyramid was no easy feat. Then the Egyptians would have also had to shave the limestone ground the granite sits on, because as seen on the Khafre pyramid, the individual granite casing stones are not all the same heights. As Keith Hamilton shows and explains in his fantastic new paper on the Pyramid of Khafre, which I'd linked below, the limestone ground was worked so the tops of the granite casing stone would all be at the same height. So with all this extra work involved, why did the Egyptians do it? Why did they bother when limestone was so plentiful, easy to work, and local to Giza? It must be for a good reason. Granite is a hard stone. It does weather, as we can see by the various types of weathering rind on the casing stones. Bird is hard to erode and has very low porosity and permeability. Therefore, I propose the granite was added for protection from water. It is important to know that when weathering and erosion are 2 different things. As a side note, the reason the granite geyser has this strange flaky coating on the outside is all because of weathering. It happens in part due to chemical reactions. For example, plagioclase crystals are key constituents of grenades that get altered to gibbsite colonite assemblages. Granitic weathering rinds are found to be silica, sodium, calcium, rubidium, and strontium deficient, and it does have different properties to the fresh granite behind them. The longer the granite has been exposed to the elements and atmosphere, the thicker the rind becomes, and such rains can be found to be 2 meters in thickness on some outcrops around the world. Chemical weathering mainly occurs because of a salty and moist environment, as well as interactions with the atmosphere itself. Then there is physical and biological weathering on top of the chemical, and altogether stone monuments. Whatever the rock type does break down over time, and it all depends on the environment. Even granite can deteriorate in less time than we think. For example, weathering has extensively altered the unfinished obelisk as warm. You can see aggressive disintegration forms, and this is from environmental factors, such as variation in air temperature, moisture values, and different anthropogenic effects, as well as the seepage of water, the disposal of solid waste at the site over the years, not to mention recent pollution, has all led to chemical reactions. In the image on the left, we see surface disintegration on the obelisk from weathering, and on the right are surface oxidation and salts, efflorescence, red spots, and also crusts are the major deterioration forms on the unfinished obelisk. The cooked granite surfaces on the casing stones of Giza also show a variety of weathering types because of the environment and the development of disintegration forms, and the crust are two such examples. Back to the subject of this video, my idea that granite casing was added for protection from water came to me while I was researching Sacsayhuaman, and I believe the polygonal masonry star you adopted besides that would be in the vicinity of water. To be clear, I don't believe polygonal masonry was used exclusively for sites subject to water. I assume it was used on the Inca palaces in Cusco, an example being the wall of the Inca Roca Palace because it was stable and earthquake-proof, and also because it looked spectacular. As Sacsayhuaman knows, in the region around the Cocujin Commerce Reservoir, the numerous small basins and wells were lined with tightly fitted polygonal masonry, and I assume this was to minimize seepage and to create the most watertight seal possible. This idea could therefore be applied to the Giza pyramids. The use of finely jointed granite, the base of 2 pyramids, and at least 1 satellite pyramid could well be to protect the structures from water and to minimize weathering and erosion of the limestone col. This would ensure the pyramids had and maintained their structural integrity. Furthermore, the chambers are both a Khafre and Menkaure pyramids are at or below ground level, and so they needed extra protection to prevent fluid water from seeping into the pyramid chambers. This idea is all well and good, but of course, when we think of ancient Egypt, we often think of a desert landscape with camels walking through the sand in front of the Great Pyramids, whilst the Great Sphinx looks out towards the baking Egyptian sun. It is an arid, barren desert landscape. So why did these pyramids need protection from water, and why didn't the Great Pyramid also have granite casing around the base? These questions do need answering, and I've delved into pale environmental records of Egypt to explain. Egypt wasn't always a dry, arid desert environment. In pre-dynastic times, records show that Egypt was relatively wet. There was high rainfall, the Nile River was deeper, and the annual inundation did drown more land. Birds' long-term decline in rainfall and the gradual drying of the Egyptian hinterland all began around 4000 BCE. At the end of the pre-dynastic era, as well as the early dynastic times, rainfall was low, and the Nile inundation was far lower than usual. The Old Kingdom is even thought to have come to an end because of drought. From around 2200 BC, at the end of the Old Kingdom, and then throughout the First Intermediate Period, from around 2180 to 2134 BC, there was growing disorder, huge civil unrest, social revolts, and rebellions. Many experts believe that this was the result of low Nile floods, meaning the inundation wasn't watering enough land, and therefore the harvests were devastated. One account of the day says all of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger to such an extent that everyone has come to eat his children. The entire country had become starved, just like a staffed grasshopper, with people going to the north and the south in search of grain. This shows that however powerful Egypt was earlier in the Old Kingdom, it was still an incredibly fragile society, and unless they have a solution, no pharaoh, however powerful, can control a nation that's starving a people without food or desperate people hard to control. We do have a good indication of the behavior of the Nile from the analysis of sediments of the Holocene lakes, or the Fine region. The Nile floods primarily fed these lakes, and so high lake levels are a direct indication of high floods and a good and plentiful inundation. As stated, we find out there was a decline in pre-dynastic and early dynastic times. But then we see an 18 to 22 meter rise in lake levels in the Old Kingdom. In comparison, just a few 100 years later, at the end of the Old Kingdom, and throughout the First Intermediate period, lake sediments recorded a very serious decline. This means that now your inundations were at their highest during the Pyramid Age, and if low floods do lead to nationwide hunger disorder, civil unrest, social revolts, and rebellions record high floods, could well mean the opposite, a time of prosperity and plentiful food above what was expected or needed. What we know is that the Pyramid Age was a wet period. This diagram by Factory Hassan shows the levels of Lake Meres up Fayum through history. And we can see just how wet the 4th dynasty was compared to other eras of history. Rainwater in Ethiopia is a major source for the Nile inundation, but there were often corresponding wet periods in Egypt as well, adding to the height of the Nile flood. The high inundation of the 4th dynasty is thought to coincide with more rainfall in Egypt as well as Ethiopia. The inundation could never reach the margins of the pyramid. They never reached that high on the Giza plateau. And that's the same whether you believe the pyramids are pre-dynastic or 4th dynasty in origin. Sediment analysis shows the water levels never got that high, even during the African human period. And so with that in mind, what is the granite on the pyramid's protection from? The answer is flash floods, surface runoff water cascading across the plateau. This happened in pre-dynastic times throughout dynastic history, and it still even happens in the modern era, although far less frequently. These are the same surface runoff flash floods that eroded the western wall of the Sphinx enclosure, as well as the western end of the southern wall. These are the same surface runoff waters that caused major damage to the original main quarry Valley Temple, as noted by Mark Lena. The first Valley Temple was composed of mud brick and completed by Men Quarry successorship, says Kaf. The later Second Temple and renovation of the first was built more than 200 years later, probably by Pepi, the second of the 6th dynasty. During his excavations in the early 20th century, George Reisner found evidence that a desert flash flood streamed down the northern side of the causeway and washed out the center of the first temple's western wall, destroying the portico and offering home. After this took place, the main quarry Valley Temple was abandoned. Eventually, people returned and rebuilt the outer wall, marked here on the diagram as a water wall. This was a fieldstone construction. It was added for protection. As a side issue, it is strange to learn that the main quarry pyramid, irrespectively size pyramid, well made with concave faces, the Great Pyramid and Park, cased in as one granite, did have a Valley Temple made of mud brick. According to the ancient Egyptian Research Associates websites, there is evidence that the main quarry wanted to build a stone temple, and also they did even start it. At the temple, there are large limestone core blocks like those seen in the Khafre Valley Temple, and these may well have been planned to be covered in granites. Work seems to have stopped abruptly, and the temple was completed in mud brick, possibly because Men-Kore died. This may also explain the unfinished appearance of the granite casing stones on the pyramid. Whatever the truth, it is another strange anomaly. Mud brick was a durable material like stone, but it wasn't completely ineffective against the elements. The fact that our GIS or flash flood did destroy it shows just how damaging water from such a phenomenon can be. We know that such a flood happened between men called Re's reign and the 6th dynasty, and that's because we can date the two temples, so it means the flood happened between 2550 BC and 2200 BC according to conventional dating. But such flash floods could well have happened many times a year for consecutive years during the Old Kingdom's wet phase. This all shows the rainfall in Egypt did have devastating effects on structures on the Giza plateau. The 4th dynasty Wall of the Crow, an enormous construction, was built to protect the workers' village from flash floods. The Sphinx enclosure has also been badly eroded by flash floods, as well likely before the Great Pyramid was even built, because this damage had to have been done before the Koreans to the west, as shown by these flow diagrams produced by Colleen Reeder. I would also suggest the Khafre Valley Temple was also covered with a granite casing to protect it from the water, the inundation being right on the edge of an ancient harbor, and also from surface runoff. But even with all this information, why case these two pyramids with granites when they also had retaining walls? Well, when you think of the size of the pyramids, Khafre is being huge, and Menkaure are smaller, but still an enormous structure. They would directly capture a lot of rainwater, water that would fall and run down the sides of the pyramid, and then pull up the bottom inside the boundary wall before draining away. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.